The most significant contribution of the Spanish composer Isaac Albéniz is to the literature of the piano. And Iberia, 12 pieces inspired by the rhythms of Spanish dances meant as musical impressions of Spain stands as one of the pinnacles in all piano music. These 12 pieces are exceptionally complex compositions, yet Albéniz began writing for the piano with very simple pieces that follow directly from the European salon style of the time. The dramatic transformation from his simple salon type and early Spanish pieces to the complexity and the universality of Iberia is quite extraordinary.
In his book, The Great Pianists, the famous New York Times critic Harold Schoenberg devoted an entire chapter to Isaac Albéniz. Albéniz was born in 1860 in Camprodon, in northern Catalonia, near the French border, where his father worked as a customs official. According to Albéniz's sister, Clementina, already by age 3, he knew all of his scales and arpeggios. At age 4, he made his first public appearance in Barcelona and was a huge hit. Later, he studied at the Madrid Conservatory, but his studies were very desultory. Why? Because already by his early teens, Albéniz was touring Spain as a concert virtuoso. He was hailed in various newspaper reviews as a phenomenon, as a little Mozart. Not only would he perform impressive pieces at the piano, but he could also play with his back to the piano, so that he was playing the keyboard with his hands reversed. By the time he was 15, he was touring in the Greater Antilles in Cuba and Puerto Rico, where his father had been stationed as a customs official. And then he took up studies at the Leipzig Conservatory. He wasn't there very long. Evidently, family finances didn't allow him to study for a longer period. And he returned to Spain. His talents came to the attention of the royal family, and the king, Alfonso XII, gave him a scholarship so that he could pursue advanced studies at the Brussels Conservatory, where he spent 3 years graduating with distinction.
His Pavana Capriccio, written when Albéniz was just 22 years old, is an example of this early salon style. It's a graceful and very lyrical composition with noble expression.
He then resumed his career as a touring virtuoso, mostly in Spain. In 1889, he made a triumphal appearance in Paris. His concert was attended by the leading lights of Parisian musical society, including Debussy. Charles-Marie Widor wrote a letter to Albéniz congratulating him on a wonderful recital. It's often said that Albéniz encountered or engaged with Parisian music as a result of this concert. I would say that Parisian music engaged with Albéniz. They learned how to simulate the sounds of Spanish folk music, of the Spanish guitar, at the keyboard. Albéniz wasn't content merely to play music by other composers. He wanted to write his own music, and in the 1880s, while he was touring as a virtuoso, he was also composing and publishing sets of very distinctive and characteristic pieces in a Spanish style that simulated Spanish folk music, particularly flamenco, that evoked and described the various regions and cities and songs and dances of Spain, particularly southern Spain, particularly what we refer to as flamenco.
Around 1883, Albéniz began to take composition lessons with Felipe Pedrell, a musicologist, a composer, and the father of the nationalist movement in Spanish music. Pedrell urged Albéniz and a generation of Spanish composers to include in their compositions elements from the rich national tradition of folklore and dances. Albéniz then began to write beautiful pieces which were immediately successful. Although the color of the music changed, the pieces still remain rather simple. What did Albéniz do to incorporate, to make these pieces sound Spanish? The guitar is one of the most beloved instruments in Spanish music, and many of these early Spanish pieces actually are best known on their guitar transcriptions. But the fact is that Albéniz did not write a single note for the guitar. He transferred instrumental idioms typical of the guitar to the piano. One of these wonderful examples is Asturias Leyenda from the Suite Española, Opus 47, where there are wonderful plaque-like sonorities which alternate with what would be an open string. Rasgueado is suggested in the beautiful Granada Serenata with the rolling chords. Spain is a country that has an extraordinary wealth of national folk song and dance rhythm. Although Albéniz was from Catalonia in the north of Spain, he was most often inspired by the music of Andalusia and flamenco with the beautiful cante hondo, which is deep or profound song. Cante hondo is the most expressive manifestation of flamenco or Spanish gypsy song. Among the many dances that Albéniz used are the malagueñas, polos, and bulerías. His refined malagueña called Rumores de la Caleta, which is whispers in the cove from travel impressions, and it uses the rhythms of the malagueña. In his copla, we can hear the allure, the sensual allure of cante hondo with the free melodic line and flowing rhythm. So this is the copla, which is really the voice of the flamenco singer. Whispers in the Cove.
I'll tell a story about how Albéniz met his wife, Rosina. She was the daughter of a prosperous middle-class family in Barcelona. And she was also a budding pianist and a great lover of music. And she had attended a concert by Albéniz, and she went to a local music store to look for his music. And he happened to be there, and she thought that he worked at the store, and she asked him if he knew where there was some music by Albéniz that she could buy. And he was more than happy to show her where the music was. He introduced himself, gave her a photo, and they were married only a few months after that and remained married for the rest of Albéniz's life. Albéniz needed a wider stage for his talents, and so with his appearance in Paris in 1889, he launched an international career. He concertized in Britain. In fact, he moved to London in 1890, toured throughout Britain, was a huge hit wherever he played. But he also continued to compose and to publish his piano music, and he set out to become a composer of musical theater. He composed operetta in London and got very good notices from George Bernard Shaw, for instance, said that he was well ahead of his rivals. That's quite an accomplishment. As a result of his activities on the stage in London, he came to the attention of Francis Burdett Money Coutts, who was the son of a wealthy banking family, but who wanted to be an author rather than a banker. Money Coutts had a lot of money, and he signed a contract with Albéniz in 1893 whereby Albéniz would set his poems and libretti to music in exchange for a very generous annual income. They completed 3 operas, and as a result of this kind of work, Albéniz entered a new phase in his development as a composer, whereby he acquired the ability to write pieces that were longer than the 3 to 5 minute character pieces he'd been composing in the 1880s. He acquired greater skill, greater technique in counterpoint and harmony and form, especially as a result of moving to Paris in 1894, where he spent the last 15 years of his life. He studied for a time at the Schola Cantorum, became a very close friend of Dandy, Fauré, and Dukas, moved in the same circles as Debussy and Ravel, and his musical style underwent a dramatic transformation. He continued to compose pieces in a Spanish style, but now he incorporated into his works what he learned in France from Debussy and others. He composed longer pieces, they're more complex in terms of their form, and he also incorporated contemporary harmonic idioms, particularly those from the Impressionist school.
Empowered with these fresh ideas, he began to write compositions for the piano that showed a highly original composer emerging. This transformative process that began in pieces like España Souvenir culminated with Iberia, which Albéniz subtitled 12 New Impressions in 4 books. The range of dynamics goes from quintuple piano, which actually means how soft can you play, to quadruple forte that precedes 20th century composers. The writing for the piano is absolutely brilliant, and it has an almost orchestral quality to it. He was a fantastic pianist, and we as pianists can feel that in the music.
As a result of his tenure in Paris, Albéniz began to compose pieces in what he called his second manner. That is, pieces that blended his Españolismo, his Spanish style, his evocations of Spanish songs and dances, with very advanced harmonic and formal techniques, especially those that he acquired from the Impressionists. This set the stage for his masterwork, his greatest accomplishment in composition, Iberia, a monumental set of 12 pieces for the piano that evoke Spain, the Spain that Albéniz loved, mostly the south of Spain, Andalusia, and flamenco. This is a remarkable composition. The pieces are substantial. The shortest one is about 5 minutes. Altogether, they take about 85 minutes to perform. It's a substantial work and very sophisticated in terms of formal design. For instance, most of the pieces are in sonata form. They present an exposition and a development section and a recapitulation. They also use the whole tone scales and progressive harmonies we associate with the French music of the time. But Albéniz never loses touch with his homeland. He imbues each of these pieces with something distinctive and genuine in terms of Spanish rhythms, Spanish modalities, and in particular, his evocation of Spanish singing and Spanish guitar playing. This is what he excels at. All of these ingredients are blended together in Iberia to create extremely colorful, distinctive, deeply felt and sincere music.
Fête Dieu à Seville, or Corpus Christi in Seville, is a most extraordinary musical representation of a religious celebration. The piece begins with faraway drums and a march-like theme, evoking a procession going through the narrow streets of Seville. Albéniz then inserts a piercing saeta, this is spelled S-A-E-T-A, which is a religious cry of fervor. He introduces this in the left hand against the march-like theme that is now utterly transformed. So this is the saeta. This is the incredible combination of the two with the transformation of the march. Lavapies was inspired by a working-class neighborhood in the city of Madrid. This is actually the one piece in the whole of Iberia that is not inspired by Andalusian dances or landscapes. The habanera, with rolling rhythmic motions, permeates throughout the piece. Albéniz here uses dissonant sonorities, a lot of imitations, counterpoint, modal colorings, and even the sound of an organillero, an organ grinder, to create the sound of a lively, a little city urban setting. And this is the sound of the organillero. Lavapies now.
Albéniz defined the term bon vivant. He was a very extroverted person. He could tell jokes that would just leave people in stitches. He had a great sense of humor. He was a nonstop talker. He would talk about anything that came into his mind, about his socks, about bullfighters in Spain, about the best hotels he stayed at. We've all known someone like this. Garrulous, great sense of humor, and fun to be with. He was a lot of fun to be with. What people don't generally know is that just behind that, I won't call it a facade, it was genuine, but just behind that very gregarious, outgoing, garrulous person was an extraordinarily sensitive individual who was frequently depressed. I'm not going to psychoanalyze Albéniz and say that he was manic depressive, but he was a person who was simultaneously depressed and joyous. A bon vivant, joie de vivre, yes, but just behind that, a serious and sometimes melancholy individual. And you hear this in his music. This is what you need to listen for. On the one hand, you'll hear a lot of surface color, a lot of vivacity, a lot of animation, but just behind that is that melancholy, nostalgic, brooding self that always resided within, but only his closest friends were familiar with.
El Albaicín was inspired by the gypsy neighborhood in the city of Granada. It begins with guitar-like sonorities and the hypnotic rhythm of the bulerías, which is in 12 beats. Its copla, which is the voice of the flamenco singer, is a single melodic line which is doubled in the left hand. In the middle of the piece, Albéniz completely transforms this single melodic line and creates a climax of extraordinary intensity. This is what it becomes.
one other thing we must say about Iberia is that it is supremely difficult. One day, Manuel de Falla encountered Albéniz on the street in Paris, and Albéniz was in a bad mood. He was clearly depressed. Why? Because he said, last night I came close to destroying my manuscripts for Iberia because I realized that it's nearly impossible to play. It's too difficult. Well, by that time, Albéniz was ill. He was no longer the pianist he had been when he was in his 20s and 30s. Fortunately, there were others who could play Iberia very well and took this music to the world.
Triana is probably one of the most beloved pieces in the entire set. It is inspired also by a gypsy neighborhood, but this time it is inspired by the city of Seville. There are sparkling rhythms with sounds that imitate castanets, tambourines, and guitars. Triana is built on two thematic ideas, which are developed and which come back. So we can say that a free adaptation of a sonata form. There are two themes, they develop and they come back. Towards the end of the piece, Albéniz combines contrapuntally, one on top of the other, the first theme and the second theme in a passage that is very virtuosic but is fantastic. So this is the first theme. This is the second theme. And this is a combination of the two.
Albéniz was a family man. He had a wife and 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. One of his daughters died in infancy. Another daughter, Laura, was a very accomplished artist, and her drawings graced the cover of the first edition of Iberia. Albéniz needed the psychological and emotional support of his family. He also depended on the financial support of money Coutts. During the last 10 years of his life, Albéniz was frequently in excruciating pain as a result of chronic inflammation of the kidneys, something known as Bright's disease. He was not able to support himself by giving concerts, and during the time that he wrote Iberia, from 1905 to 1908, he was in a lot of pain. Albéniz died just short of his 49th birthday, but during his relatively short life, he left a treasure trove of beautiful music for us to enjoy. And Iberia lives on as one of the great masterpieces in the piano repertoire.